Okay, so now it's a time. Hi, everyone. Can you hear me? Can you see me? Okay, great. All right. My name is Haewon E. I'm the director and curator of Amelie A. Wallace Gallery at SUNY College at Old Westbury. Due to the pandemic, since last spring, we have exhibited everything virtually. And this exhibition, Laurie Riccadonna, Eternal Bloom, is currently actually exhibited at the Old Westbury Gallery in Hudson County Community College. It is organized by Michelle Vitale, director of the HCC Department of Cultural Affairs. I would like to thank Michelle as well as Laurie for giving me assistance organizing this exhibition. And this event is also sponsored by Dean of the School of Arts and Sciences. So I would like to thank Amanda Briskin for sponsoring this exhibition, a virtual event. So so the Laurie will discuss works featured in her virtual exhibition at the Wallace Gallery, as well as many other works that's currently at the Dean Gallery at Hudson County Community College, and some other works that are not in the exhibition as well. Let me introduce a little bit about the exhibition as well as her work. Our current virtual exhibition consists of paintings and works on paper selected from several of Riccadonna's series, garden series, hanging garden series, puzzle series, tile series, and plastic pollution series. As a keen observer and admirer of nature, as well as critic of environmental pollution, Riccadonna's artistic practices are partly inspired by P&D pattern and decoration movement of the late 1970s and early 80s that rebelled against the modernist constraints of minimalism by bringing attention to the designs and materials and techniques associated with craft, folk art, and women's work. And she has also told me that many other artists have influenced her. Peter Cohen, Ebony Patterson are some of these artists who fascinated her. Islamic tile decoration and its expression in Spanish and Portuguese ceramics and Roman mosaics are also prominent influences on Riccadonna's work. In the time of a pandemic, Riccadonna's images of nature provide a delightful escape, at least to me, while her canvases of plastic debris are warnings of industrial consumption and devastating damage to the earth. So she will explain many other works in the exhibition in detail. So I'm not going to continue more explanation of her work. Laurie Riccadonna is a professor and department coordinator of the art department at Hudson County Community College, New Jersey. She is the recipient of a 2020 Association of Community College Trustees Northeast Region Faculty Award. And she has received her BFA in painting and drawing from Pennsylvania State University, and she earned an MFA in painting and printmaking from Yale University School of Arts. Her art has been exhibited in many venues. I'm going to just list some of the venues: Spring Break Art Fair, Teknik Museet Museum of Drawing in Sweden, Brooklyn Botanic Garden, Space B Gallery, Hamilton Square in Jersey City, a Village West Gallery in Jersey City, Center for the Arts at Casa Colombo, Jersey City, Rutgers School of Arts and Sciences Institute for Research on Women, New Brunswick, New Jersey, and Census Space Gallery in New Jersey. Her work is in Memorial Sloan Kettering Monmouth collection, and Hudson County's Community College Foundation Permanent Art Collection. She has completed residencies at the Foundation Valparaiso, Mojaca, Spain, the Virginia Center for the Creative Arts, Beaumont Studio Arts, and Women's Studio Workshop. She was a recipient of the New Jersey State Council on the Arts Individual Artist Fellowship and Yale University's Eli Hartwood Schultz Prize. So please welcome Laurie Riccadonna.
Thank you so much, Heywan. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Oops. Great. How does that work? Everyone can see it? Awesome. Thank you. Well, thank you again, Heywan. I would like to give her a special thanks for organizing this talk and also the virtual exhibition. If you haven't had a chance to take a look at it yet, I hope that you're able to visit it at the Wallace Gallery page. A few other people I would just like to thank that made this event possible would be Professor Fred Fleischer, who is a professor at SUNY Old Westbury, a longtime friend and colleague, Michelle Vitale, who is the Director of Cultural Affairs, and Michael Lee, who is also from Cultural Affairs at Hudson County Community College. So they all really helped and made this show up possible. So I would like to begin by introducing my work and showing you a few images of the actual show that's installed at Hudson Community College. This show is up through next fall, so I hope that if you find yourself in Jersey City, you're able to visit the gallery and see the works in person. One of the challenges that I always find with my work is that the pieces, some of the larger pieces have a lot of detail and they sometimes are difficult to photograph. So, art is always better in person. So I hope that you have the chance to see it in person. But I thought I would begin by just showing you some overall installation shots of the show. I worked closely with Michelle Vitale and Michael Lee, selecting the works for the show. And the overall idea for the exhibit was that this was kind of a survey of my work over the past 20 years. I've been at the college about that long, and the pieces that we selected for the exhibit kind of reference specific points in my career at teaching at Hudson Community College, and also kind of tell the story of how I got where I am with my current work. So the first piece that I'm going to begin with today is the oldest piece that's in the exhibition. And it's interesting because as we were selecting works for the exhibition, we selected this piece because it seemed to encapsulate so much of what my work is about and has been about. So in a way, it oddly kind of foreshadowed a lot of the work that I made later on in my career. So this piece was made right about the time when I first started teaching at the college. It is a work in 4 panels. It's quite a large piece. And at the time I was looking a lot at Spanish and Portuguese tile. And I was interested in, how tile, it's a very durable material, but at the same time, it's also has a very fragile component as it's made out of ceramic and can, be smashed very easily. And with these paintings, I was interested in the way in the way the tiles kind of could build pattern and give a sense of stability, but also at the same time, the pattern could dissolve and slip out of place. So in this particular piece, it's made up of 4 panels, and it's quite a large piece. And I enjoyed working large, and I think the size of this piece allows the viewer really to get lost within the pattern and the mark making, as you look at the work. The work that I was doing at this time, related to the grid in painting and how the grid can be subverted and used, to disrupt pattern, and also just to give a feeling of, it kind of swirls around you, how you can kind of build up pattern and then the pattern also collapses. And this is a detail shot of the piece. one of the things that really fascinated me with tile is that a lot of hand painted tile doesn't quite match up with the tile, the one tile next to it. It doesn't always match up. And so I like that idea of a little bit of imperfection or colors in the glazes that varied from one tile to the next. And so that was something very important in the work, that the colors are slightly different in each area. Things don't quite match up, but yet when you step back away from the piece, you can see the organization of it. From there, I moved on to a series of paintings that I call the garden series. And I think these pieces were kind of an escape from that, the formal rigor of having a grid on the painting. These pieces were, even though they're very organized, a little bit looser in a sense, in terms of how I was using the pattern. I was obviously referencing gardens and things that were growing, and plants and flowers, and in all of this series there was kind of a rhythm to the paintings. So this was the first painting I did, and these were all about 6 by 6 feet, so they're very large paintings. And again, the scale of the painting allows the viewer to kind of get lost in these flowers and vines and kind of plant-like forms. This is a second piece that's also in the exhibit in Jersey City. And with these pieces, I was very much interested in how things can kind of become like they feel like they're bursting at the seams, or the plant life is overtaking the underlying structure. So in this piece, there's a background pattern, and then these flowers seem to kind of burst out and through the space. And again, with the size of the works, you kind of find yourself, getting lost and following through on some of these areas of the pieces. The series continued. I was really starting to move away a little bit from so much pattern and looking at ways to represent the landscape in my work. Landscape has always been something that I'm interested in. And even when I was expressly dealing with pieces that portrayed different types of patterns, I think in a way they functioned in a way like landscape. And so these are some smaller works that I did as part of this series, where I was beginning to move into more literal landscapes. This was a painting I did when I was at the residency in Spain. It was a garden kind of out front, and I was very interested in kind of compressing this very deep space of the landscape, but in a more flattened way, almost like making a tapestry, pulling the foreground and the background together. I also experimented with some ideas of like cutaways. So, what's happening on the surface of the garden, and then as you cut away into the earth, there's all of this activity underneath the ground. So, imagining like roots and flowers and things growing and moving underneath the surface of the earth, and then kind of having this repeating pattern up here on the top. So a lot of these pieces obviously were directly relating to landscape, and I was trying to figure out a way to incorporate my love of pattern and decoration into them. I wanted to include some influences that I look at quite often that influence my work, both past and present. At the exhibition in Jersey City, there's several tables of these items, so that viewers can see both the actual items and then how they influenced my paintings. Some of the items that I have on view are some ceramic tiles that I collected from trips to Spain. These are, there's 2 tiles here and they kind of fit together, but I've always been very much interested in the history of ceramics and ceramic tile. As I mentioned, I love how things fit together. And I think this comes into play in the series that I'll be talking about later on today. I also have some embroideries that were not completed by me. This was antique lace piece, and I love how pattern can build from just this very like skeletal design at the bottom into this much more elaborate area at the top. So this was an unfinished lace piece, but this is something else that, you know, I'm always thinking about in my work, how pattern can build from a basic structure into something that's very ornate. And then the bottom two images are two samples of Guatemalan embroidery. I'm very much interested in this type of embroidery and just the color of the embroideries. And so I collect these little swatches of embroideries and, you know, really look at the color and kind of find them, you know, very inspirational to look at when I'm making my work. So the second series of paintings that I'm going to talk about was a series from a show that I had that was called The Hanging Garden. And this is a very large painting. It's as you see, it's 46 by 84 inches. And with this series of paintings, I used this piece, which was the largest of this series, as kind of the basis for the creation of an entire series of paintings. So it was a large painting, and as I was working on this piece, I was also working on a lot of much smaller pieces that all related back to this piece. So you know, you'll notice as we go through some of these images, some of the patterns or some of the imagery repeated in these other works. When I got to this point, I was looking at a lot of textile patterns, and I was also taking trips to the Adirondacks with my family, and I was really interested in the way like plant life can take over you know, maybe decaying structures, whether it be like a dock or a wall of a house or a shed or kind of dilapidated wooden structures. And I started doing these drawings and sketches of like planks of wood that were being held together by pattern and references to nature. So like I said, this is the largest of the series, and then it inspired a variety of smaller pieces. So you know, I would use like certain sections of the painting to then create smaller works. So as I was working on this, it was kind of like everything was happening all at the same time. This is a detail from the painting, and one of the things that I'm interested in this series is referencing the grid. You know, the grid provides a structure, but then it can be disrupted by all of these other areas of pattern, or you know, like the bird reference or the flowers that are kind of growing up the planks of wood, and how areas of like what we would consider negative space become also you know, it's like there's really no negative space in this painting, that every area is full. And you know, I think that a lot of this work comes from just my interest in looking at things and observing things. And I really try to fill up my paintings so that the viewer can really be immersed in this experience of looking. And I think that, you know, that's what I love about painting, is that, you know, I love looking closely at things. And I want the viewer, when they see these works, to kind of have that same experience. So this was one of the smaller paintings that I worked on that was inspired by this series. This is a second. So again, it was kind of a way, you know, working on the smaller pieces kind of allowed me to kind of break down what I was working on the larger piece and work out issues, maybe even color issues, and then take that and apply it to the larger piece as well. And I always enjoy, like, as I'm making these pieces, I enjoy hiding things in the painting, so that, you know, the closer the viewer looks at the piece or the longer you spend with the painting, I want it to keep rewarding the viewer. So, you know, just as a example for in this work, You know, there's all of these ladybugs that are kind of crawling all over this plank, and then there's little ducks that seem to be swimming on the wood grain, which also references water. So you know, it's just the deeper that you look into the piece, I hope that there's more and more for the viewer to find. And so, as I mentioned, a lot of these paintings were direct results of trips with my family, where we could just kind of relax and look and enjoy nature. And I would do a lot of small studies where, you know, for instance, we found this little newt, and you know, then it kind of plays into, you know, a pattern study that I'm doing, which is just a small watercolor gouache, but then finds its way into a larger piece. This is another piece, and I enjoy, with this series, I enjoyed titling the pieces after, you know, specific places, and that's something that I hadn't done previously with my work, but I enjoyed being able to reference a painting to a specific experience or a specific place. And in this whole series, you know, just a few things is that the structures are always kind of falling apart, but they're just, you know, in this like tenuous balance of collapse and also just barely holding together, whether it's being held together by the plant life or, you know, like these kind of moments of like remembering what used to be there, and it holds together the structure. Another from the series. And as I was working on this, I really started becoming interested in how much I could fit into a very shallow space. So a lot of these paintings have a lot of stuff going on, but when you think about the kind of space of the painting, it's a very shallow space. And I would often think about looking through a fence and, you know, what you see beyond the fence, or if you look through a hole in the fence, you only see a small moment or a small, you know, you don't get the whole view. And so in some of these pieces, I was thinking about, as you look through a fence, you know, seeing just these little moments and little slices of what's on the other side. As I work, I like to do a lot of smaller studies. I don't typically do the studies first and then the painting, but it seems like they happen simultaneously. So I may be working on a painting and then take some ideas from that painting and put it into smaller works. And so I really enjoy working with watercolor and gouache, because I feel like the watercolor allows a really nice sense of transparency. And the gouache is obviously a much more opaque material. And so I really enjoy the push and pull of those two materials when they work together. And so with this series, I did do a lot of small watercolors informing what I was doing in the larger paintings. And I still work this way. So this is, I thought I would show, these two were from when I was working on the Hanging Garden series. This is something newer that I just did more recently. And I just feel like these little studies help me, even though it might not look anything like what I'm doing in the studio at times, they just help me move forward with like different color combinations or ideas, or the rhythm in them kind of motivate me to move forward in different ways. So I also like to do these very graphic ink drawings. These are just ink on Bristol paper, but I think with this series, you know, color is a very important part of my work, especially in this Hanging Garden series. And at a certain point, I felt like I really needed to kind of take a step back and think about the color choices that I was making with the pieces. And, you know, sometimes it can feel like, you know, sometimes it would feel a little bit like I was just choosing certain colors randomly. So I wanted to take a step back and really think about what I was doing. And I found that doing these line drawings was really helpful. These two both relate back to that garden series, but also, I'll revisit patterns when I'm doing these. So for instance, the Forget Me Not pattern that I recently did was something from a drawing that I had done much earlier in this work. You see it over here. But it's a way to like move back and forth and really help me kind of think about, how I'm organizing my pieces and what I'm doing. These are two more. And sometimes I do like working just in black and white because it really helps me just think about the structure of the painting, because I love color and I can get really carried away with color and get really excited about it. And I found like kind of taking a step back and just doing more simple line drawings helps me really focus on what I'm doing, and then I can jump in with the color. So the Hanging Garden series came to an end with some of this watercolor series that I'm going to show you. Again, it was kind of, using these like forms that referenced wood grain. I was thinking a lot about like looking through a decaying structure, like whether it be a dock, like in this painting, I was kind of thinking of like, what if you were on this dock and you're kind of looking down through it and seeing these water lilies, and things are kind of just hanging in balance. This is another from this series. These were all watercolor and gouache on paper, about 18 by 24, and they're rather large watercolors for how I usually work with watercolor. But I really did enjoy kind of the push and pull between using the two mediums and having these areas of very flat space with then areas of much deeper color and playing with transparency. Oops. Great. So these watercolors wrapped up this series of the Hanging Garden, and I always find it a little bit challenging when you're finishing a series and then it's, what do I move on to next? And I always, kind of put this pressure on myself, like, what's the next thing? And that the Hanging Garden series culminated right around the time I had two very young children. And I was feeling a little bit, at a loss as to like how I'm going to move on. And so I started looking a lot at photos of archaeologists unearthing mosaics. And this was something, I happened to see an article about this, about an excavation, and it got me really excited. And so I started looking at all of these photos, and I just found the, these images of pattern or of these mosaics being unveiled so exciting. I've always been interested in fragments and, fragments of sculptures or fragments of broken pottery or ceramics. And I was really excited about what I was seeing. And so that got me thinking about a few different things. And one of which was, what's in the missing area. So like, for instance, in the bottom photo, there's some areas of the mosaic that's been damaged and missing. And then also how these little pieces build up to make an image, and this unveiling of this image as these archaeologists were working. And so I started thinking about, what I loved about that. And it led me to jigsaw puzzles, because I found, a nice correlation between a mosaic and also jigsaw puzzles, and just, the tactility of the pieces, the rich color. And, I was very much interested in, like in the previous series, whereas I was using tile, how things work together to build something. And so I started thinking about how I could, what I was going to do with this and how I was going to use this. And so, the first time I cracked open one of these puzzles, and I have to say, I'm not very good at putting together puzzles. It takes me a really long time. So this wasn't, an easy decision to, start thinking about putting together puzzles for paintings. But when I cracked open the puzzle and poured the pieces on the table, I was really excited because I just thought they were so beautiful just in the, in the separate pieces and the colors that were there. It was very abstract. And so it really got me motivated to move into a new series of work. Before we look at these paintings, I just wanted to mention that for this series, I specifically selected puzzles of still life and specifically floral bouquets. I was, looking at these, there's all of these old master, puzzles that you can purchase. And I was really interested in these floral bouquets for their reference to Vanitas still life. I've always loved still life painting. And I was very interested in how artists use, in the tradition of Vanitas paintings, where artists take images that reference the brief time that we're here on Earth. They're sending a message, whether it's a snuffed out candle or a skull. These objects are sending messages that we're only here for a short while, and you better make the most of it. And I was particularly interested in the floral still lifes because these bouquets were like impossible bouquets. Like for instance, artists would assemble these bouquets to be painted, but not all of those flowers could have actually been in bloom at the same time. So they were like piecing together these amazing floral paintings, but it's not that they were just referencing directly in their studio. They're piecing it together as these flowers come into bloom or as they were working. So I began this series, the puzzle series, with this in mind. One of the things that I would do is that I would put together several different puzzles. So I wasn't just copying from one puzzle or, trying to make one puzzle, but I would put together sections of different puzzles and then, kind of use the sections of puzzles, intermix them. And so this is one of the first paintings from this series. And I titled all of these paintings bouquet because I was thinking of them as a puzzle bouquet. And I was very much interested in both the image, the floral imagery, but also the negative space and the areas of background space. Much like those missing areas of the mosaics, like it forms like this kind of empty missing area, even though it's part of the puzzle. And one of the things I really was thinking about as I was making these is that in a way, these were the puzzle bouquets were like in bloom, but they were also kind of falling apart at the same time. So, I wasn't just putting together the puzzle, but it's this kind of back and forth between, is this collapsing or is it going to ever be put together? And I would try to, indicate like, okay, here's the vase, and I'd kind of place things so that you start to get the idea of it forming, but also allowing the interpretation of things kind of collapsing and falling apart at the same time. This is a smaller piece. I would actually put the puzzles together in my studio, and then, like I said, I would kind of pick and choose sections of the puzzles to use in the still life, so they wouldn't always kind of match up with the same puzzle, so things were kind of interspersed. This is another. And these are some in progress shots of one of the larger pieces that I was working on. And so as I would work on the paintings, I would, I had all of these like puzzles stacked up in sections of puzzles. And I would literally trace the section of puzzle onto the canvas. So you can see here how it's like, this is just this cluster of pieces. I would trace that on, but I wouldn't put any of the imagery onto it. So I would just trace the puzzle pieces and I would set it aside, trace another section, set it aside. And I would have a general idea of what the composition was going to look like in my mind, but I didn't have anything drawn out on the canvas. And so as I would work on the painting kind of revealed itself to me as I was working. So I'd have a general idea like, okay, I want, you know, this group of roses over here. I'd want this flower over here. And that way I felt like I would allow myself to have, you know, some surprises as I'm working on it, and things would kind of reveal themselves to me also. So it wasn't just, you know, too planned out. Because one of the things that I started noticing as I was looking at more and more of these floral paintings is that there was an actual, like an arrangement of where the flowers would be placed. So there was always a large red carnation way at the top of the painting. Then there was always a grouping of like 3 roses off on the, you know, the left-hand side. And so I tried to follow those like kind of general rules that I started observing in these paintings with my own work. But you know, it was really exciting and fun to see, like as I was working on these paintings, to see, you know, what the painting was looking like as I moved through it. So this is the completed painting. And again, you know, I really see these as like impossible puzzles that you're never able to fully put it together, that it's never all going to come together at the same time. You know, things are breaking apart, things are coming together. But, you know, it's just constantly in flux. This is a detail. And another detail. And I think, you know, with these pieces, I really enjoyed building up the paint on the surface of the canvas. One of the things that led me to using the puzzle as a subject matter is when I was making the more pattern-based paintings, is I really missed the tactility of holding an object and painting it, or looking at a still life object and painting it. So I think with, you know, with these works, I was really, I can go back. You know, I'm painting a reproduced image, but I wanted the puzzle pieces to have a feel to them, and you know, they're all painted to scale, so you know, they're the size that you would expect a puzzle piece to be, and that was really important to me as I was working on them. Great. And as I did, you know, in the previous body of work, I also, as I was working on these pieces, I did studies just in black and white to kind of work out some issues. So this was a small graphite on paper from right around the same time. And I just, you know, I enjoyed kind of playing with compositions of fitting things into the paper. So not necessarily like making things the size of the actual puzzle, but, you know, fitting things into the paper. And I did a series of these based on the puzzle paintings that I was working on. Great. So the puzzle series kind of wrapped up, and I was thinking about, you know, what comes next. And I knew that I was very much interested in continuing painting objects that have a tactile quality. I like being able to look at what I'm painting rather than, you know, I mean, I always am looking at what I'm painting, but like I like having objects in my studio that I can reference in my work. So whether it's you know, a flat ceramic tile or a puzzle piece, I realized that I like to have that object while I'm working. It's very important to me. I like the scale of the objects, feeling the you know, object in my hand, and really being able to observe the object as close as possible. So that kind of led me to my most recent body of work. And, you know, as I look back over all of these pieces that I've made, I think that there are a few points that jump out at me. Is that when I'm making work, there's something about the process of discovery that is really important to me. So whether it's looking at elaborate patterns and finding something within the pattern, or piecing together the puzzles, I love the intensity of really looking at things. And, you know, when I'm out in nature, I really enjoy hunting for seashells, or, you know, looking under rocks, seeing what I'm going to find. So I like that like kind of process of discovery. And so I was thinking about that a lot as I was moving into this series, and thinking about, you know, I love shells and looking for things at the beach. And it's almost impossible at this point to, you know, think about doing an activity like that without finding all kinds of other, you know, plastic or cigarette butt or something, you know, in these very natural surroundings. And so I started looking, you know, a lot as I was out, and kind of noticing these things that I would find. And then also it kind of coincided with, you know, a lot of discussion in the contemporary world about the you know, horrible situation we're finding ourselves in with plastic pollution. And I saw the movie Albatross, which was by Chris Jordan, the photographer. And it really struck me because in this movie, it was, you know, in his photographs, he shows the impact that plastic pollution is having on wildlife. And some of his photographs are photographs of albatross chicks that have died because they have so much plastic in their system. And I was struck by how both horrifying those images are, but also how oddly beautiful they are because of this, you know, the plastic color, and there was something that like kind of attracts you, but then when you realize what you're looking at, it's, you know, so there's an attraction and repulsion aspect. And so I started thinking a lot about how I could incorporate this into my work. And this was a bit of a change for me because I've always painted things that are always thought of as very beautiful. So whether it's flowers or gardens or pattern, I've always been interested in, you know, that type of imagery. And so I began a series of paintings of things that I collected in my house. So I love shells, and I have a lot of shells, and I love to paint them and look at them. And I started collecting like bottle caps and recyclable caps to things, because at the time, you know, in Jersey City, that wasn't even recyclable. And so I had, you know, friends collecting little plastic things for me, and I accumulated quite a mass of plastic junk. And so I began these paintings. This is a very small painting, and it was directly from life. So I would set up these still lifes in my studio and then paint directly from them, which, you know, I found quite challenging, as I had been working from, you know, flatter objects and surfaces leading up to this. So I would assemble, this is a photograph of the still life that I have. I would assemble these like jumbles of things, a lot of, you know, junk that I would just find, some things like sometimes there would be some litter from around outside of my house, but also a lot of little children's toys, because you know, my kids would come home from school or come home from a birthday party with a goodie bag filled with plastic junk that they would play with one time, and then, you know, it's done. And so I think that was, you know, a pretty, you know, important influence as to why I started actually making these paintings as well. So I would construct a box that was exactly the size of the canvas that I was working on, and I'd fill the box with this plastic junk, sometimes more arranged, sometimes less arranged, but just this jumble of both natural and plastic materials, and then use that as the basis for my still life. So this was one of the first of this series. And I would paint everything from observation. So I would try to, you know, set up my light source and paint from observation. And it was actually, you know, very challenging. And it was also kind of funny because you know, my still life kept changing because as I was working, my studio's at my house, and my kids would come through and say, "Oh, I remember that," and, you know, take it out of the still life, and no, don't touch it. But anyway, so, you know, I wanted these to be both, you know, kind of reminders of an looming environmental crisis, but also to have a sense of kind of play and not necessarily humor, but discovery. You know, as you look through them, you find little things, or, you know, you remember something from your childhood, or you see something that you can relate to. This is a detail from the piece. And I especially enjoyed painting netting. So like I have this red netting here. I really enjoyed working on that. And then all of the objects were, you know, on this background kind of netting. So I don't know what's going to happen with that, but that's something that I'm thinking about in my studio right now. So this was another still life I had set up in my studio. And one of the things that I realized as I was working on these paintings is that I wanted them to be a definite, you know, call to action, in a sense that this is, you know, this is a crisis. This is something that we have to think about. Plastic pollution, you know, plastic never goes away. But at the same time, I was also thinking that as a painting, it kind of changes the nature in a sense, because a photograph can send the warning, you know, in a sense, like taking a photograph of, you know, a mass of plastic on a beach can, I think, send a very clear message and clear reminder. And so as I was working into these paintings, I started thinking about them less as like a call to action, but a little bit of a personal self-portrait in a way, that it's like, look at all of this stuff I've produced. Look at all of this, you know, all of these plastic items have moved through my own house. And so in a way, it kind of, you know, was a little bit of you know, a change in the way I was thinking about these. So this was another pile of stuff that I had in my studio, and it served as the still life for this piece. So again, I was working directly from observation, and in a sense, kind of thinking about those floral bouquets from the puzzle series, in the sense that these, in a way, are like almost like bouquets of plastic and junk. And you know, so I definitely kind of see a relationship between those two bodies of work. But I really had fun making these pieces. I think that you know, it's a piece that you can keep coming back to and looking more and more into. And, you know, I like to kind of, you know, have objects that, you know, maybe your kid has, or, you know, you've played with once, or, and then, you know, so there's a lot of like little rubber animals and plastic toys, and, you know, green army men, and different types of things that you would identify as like a toy, but then kind of put together in this group becomes a warning about where we're headed with the planet. Let's see. And then this is the last piece that I'm going to speak about today. And this was also from that series. Again, it was kind of a jumble of caps, like bottle caps, and little toys and things like that, with shells. And again, I had it all set up in like this box, and was painted directly from observation. And you know, I kind of I titled this self-portrait as Ophelia because a friend gave me this weird little plastic figure who I liked very much, and I just thought that it kind of seemed fitting. I have a postcard of Amelie A's Ophelia hanging in my studio, and I just, one day I was painting this little guy and kind of glanced up and saw, you know, Ophelia drowning in this beautiful stream, and I felt like this little guy is kind of drowning in this sea of plastic. So you know, I kind of had fun with that. But anyways, okay, so those are the images that are most are included in the Deneen Hall exhibit. And then there were a few additional ones added, but that's what I have for you today. I'd be happy to answer any questions. Oops, also one last thing, sorry. If you're interested in my work, you can definitely visit my website. And I just wanted to mention that my colleague Michael Lee wrote an essay that accompanies the exhibition. It's included on my website, and it's a really wonderful essay. I couldn't have asked for a nicer essay to accompany the show, but you can find that on my website.
So anyone who has questions for Laurie? Okay, we have a question from Fred Fleischer. I will read that for you, Laurie. Do you feel comfortable scaling up and down from large to small size?
Fred, I'm wondering if you mean in terms of the canvas size or the image size?
Yeah, like I know a little bit about your process, but you know, there are times where you've got this 7-foot wide canvas and there's this kind of energy and kind of organization in it that some of those smaller ones, like those little interesting drawings and prints, I mean, how does your mind work to be able to go from that, or do you really kind of translate in the small onto that large canvas? You know, I guess the planning stage.
Okay, the end of your message, Fred, kind of was hard to understand.
Yeah, I was just saying about it in when you plan, like how is it easy to plan large? Let's go with that.
I think for me, it's actually easier to plan a large piece. I like working on a large scale because I feel like everything's in relation to my body. And so I have an easier time working that way. I think the smaller works help me focus and really think about, you know, maybe just one specific area. So I think I really enjoy the planning when I'm making larger pieces. So you know, I like working both ways, and ideally my pieces are large paintings filled with lots of little details. So I think that when I work smaller, it's kind of working out the details, and then the larger ones focus more on the overall composition.
Oh, that's great. Thank you, Laurie. Appreciate
Thanks,
that.
Fred.
Carolina Vasquez has her hand up.
Okay.
Hello, Laurie. I love your work. I got a question. So I'm talking about the first series of painting, the garden, and afterwards the puzzle. So do you plan the placement of color since you're sketching, since the moment you start sketching, or you leave some space for improvisation?
Sure, thank you. That's a great question, and it's something that I think about a lot when I'm working. I think most of my color decisions happen once I'm actually working on the piece, so that, you know, the sketches and the planning that I do usually is just the composition or the structure, and then as I'm painting, I really enjoy the color piece of it, but I feel like that's much more intuitive. So I don't really plan anything out. It's just reacting to, you know, I'll put down a color and then react to that. I mean, I might sometimes have like a general palette in mind, but it usually ends up very different than what I was thinking at the beginning.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Let me see, two more. Michelle Vitale has raised her hand. So would you like to ask a question, Michelle?
Yeah, I just first of all want to thank you so much for highlighting Laurie's work in this way. You know, one of the great things about Laurie is she just makes art so romantic. And I mean that in the nice, like, just, you know, the idea of being in your studio and thinking about things like space and color, and to keep that so at the heart of what she makes, you know, is so inspiring, because a lot of people have left this this kind of art making process a long time ago. So I just want to thank you for that, because I do feel like this is just what makes me love art so much. Laurie, I wanted to ask you a little bit about color, and I know we've had lots of conversations, but, you know, maybe just even for the general audience, like, you know, your colors don't seem arbitrary. They really do feel selected. And I was wondering if you could talk like a little bit more about, you know, your choices and, you know, and how you debate that in the studio, you know, with wet paint.
That's a great question. I think it depends on what work or what body of work I'm working on. I think the more pattern-based work, I would, you know, do things like collect samples of things, whether it's fabric or tiles or wallpaper. You know, I have all of these references, and sometimes I'll even look at paintings that I love and kind of note the colors and the color combinations, and so then I bring that when I'm you know, working on the pieces. The puzzle pieces and the still life pieces, I think it's a little bit more based on observation. So, you know, I'm painting what I see. With the plastic, the most recent work, I definitely had a little bit of, you know, it was a little tough to get those plasticky colors because I love earth tones. So like, you know, putting out these like garish colors, sometimes it, you know, was a little bit, went a little bit against my nature, but you know, I'm not even sure that they ever ended up, you know, where they should have been, but it's something that I'm thinking about. And, you know, one of the things that I've been collecting, like beach plastic, like that gathered from the ocean. And the color of that I find so beautiful because it isn't so garish. It's not that brand new plastic. It's been worn away, and it has a very beautiful color to it. So, you know, so I'm always like, you know, I always have references that I'm looking at, but at the same time, I think that I do allow myself when I'm working to just kind of go with it. So if I find a, you know, a palette that I like, I kind of just spin off of that as I'm working.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
We have a question from Chris Hartman. Thanks for the great talk and for sharing your work. Can you speak about the decision to use mostly household plastic items as opposed to mostly items found outside, for example, beach, rivers, parks, etc.?
That's a really great question. I think these first pieces felt very personal to me. Like it was, what am I producing? Or like what, those plastic items were the items that I was most aware of because they're coming out of my household, or they're things that I see, you know, littered around my house, or, you know, just they were a little bit more personal. However, the paintings that I'm working on now, that they weren't included in this presentation, are moving beyond just those found outside in litter, and a little less specific. So like I said, the paintings that I showed you today, I felt like in a sense were like self-portraits, because there were things that were coming from directly from me or my family, or, you know, in my immediate surroundings. And now I'm kind of, you know, the painting that I'm working on currently in the studio is referencing beach plastic.
All right. Another question from Michelle Cruz. For most of your paintings, do you produce a small size tile and later on implement them on a larger composition, or start with a large composition and work your way around it?
I think the simple answer would be yes. I think I do both. I enjoy starting large, and then it's like I start with big ambitions, and then I have to like kind of step back and work on the smaller pieces. So I think that it's a little bit of both, but I do like starting with the bigger piece and then kind of moving back and forth between smaller studies and the larger piece.
So I have a question for you.
Okay, great.
So I noticed that actually a couple of questions. It seems like a lot of your large canvas work seem to be very labor intensive.
Mhm.
And how intensely do you work on those canvases? Meaning, how many hours do you put into, or do you work at nighttime or in the morning? What is your work habit working on those labor intensive work?
Mhm.
And then second question is,
Okay.
I noticed that you tended to fill up every inch of the canvas, like a
Yes.
filling up. I mean, kind of almost dealing with the horror vacui.
Yes.
So I'm just wondering about kind of why you seem to be doing that. Like, why wouldn't you leave some space open or empty?
Right.
um,
Okay.
yeah, just kind of I'm curious how you compose these images, and there is a tendency to fill up the space.
Right.
So just wanted to know about these
Right.
issues.
Sure. I really love labor intensive work, and I think it's just, I love also the traditions in craft, like, lace making or I don't know, knitting, or, I love labor intensive sewing things. I mean, not that I don't do those things, but those are things that I love looking at. So I think it's just a natural tendency with me that's how my work takes shape. I often, if a piece finishes too quickly, somehow I'm always suspicious of it. Like, I feel like I have to have this real time investment in a piece. And it's not necessarily that it's that I have to log a certain number of hours, but it's just that I have to spend a certain amount of time and care with it before I'm ready to let it go. So I love looking at work that's like very gestural and fast, because I think it's the opposite of what, of how I'm working. But I think that a lot of the way I get the work done is the puzzle pieces and pattern pieces are easier to, you can work on a small section and then, very intensely, then move away from it, work on another small section. I found that harder to do with the paintings from life, the plastic series, because you're thinking of an overall still life. So it becomes a little bit harder to really, just like to take a break from it. Like, you really need like a large chunk of time to work into it. So that was something I definitely found challenging with the still life paintings. But I think it's just like a little, I try to really do a little bit at a time. I feel like I'm a slow painter, but I just, I think it's just a matter of like, just keep chipping away at something, and eventually it falls into place. In terms of filling up the surface area, I don't have a great answer for that. I think I've just always been like that. I love looking at things close up, and I love detail. And so, I've often thought that, like, well, you might appreciate all of that detail a little bit more if there was some open space around it. But that can be the wall. I like having the intensity of the painted surface. And there's just something about that has always interested me. And I think it's just part of my personality or who I am.
That's what makes your work unique.
Yeah. Thanks.
There are two more questions.
Okay.
Okay, so it's could you elaborate on how you begin the process and the idea of the images revealing themselves as you work on the paintings, the puzzle paintings?
Okay, I'm sorry. Could you read that one more time? I don't see it in the chat.
It's from Harvey Rubenstein. Could you elaborate on how you begin the process and the idea of the images revealing themselves as you work on the painting?
Okay, so the puzzle paintings, I would put together the puzzles first, and I also had friends putting together puzzles for me because it would take too long otherwise. But I would then break the puzzles or just have these sections of the puzzles, and then I would trace those sections onto the canvas piece by piece so that it was the exact section of that particular puzzle, but I wouldn't draw any of the imagery on it. And then I kept everything numbered, so I would know that that particular section was number 7 or whatever. And then when I would get to that section, I would paint in whatever image was on that section. So I wouldn't have the flowers drawn onto the canvas. I would just kind of, I would have to, like when I started painting, I would take that section and paint that onto the canvas. So as I was working, I never knew what the whole painting would look like once it's finished. I had an idea of memory as I was like deciding where I would place those sections, but I would only put the imagery into those sections as I was painting, and I would paint section by section. So, like as I was working, I had a general idea of what the painting would look like when it was done, but I wouldn't really know, as I was working, I would often find myself like, oh, I forgot that this is what's going to be here. But that's what kept it interesting for me. And I think, it allowed a little less control, it was a little bit, out of my control as to what the image was going to look like.
So you start with the overall plan, but you allow certain accidents,
yes,
spontaneity.
Yes.
Thank you.
And I think that happens just in every painting. I mean, I think you always have this idea of what it's going to look like. And usually for me, at least, by the time I finish, it doesn't really look anything like, I try to really start out with a very clear framework and idea of what the piece will be. But then by the time it ends, it looks very different. Colors have changed or things have moved position. And so it's very different than how I envisioned it to start.
We have a question from Michael Lee. Do you want to combine the pattern with the accumulation? Talk more about that idea if possible. He has a question about the future.
Okay, so I am actually combining things a little bit. I am using, currently in my studio, I'm using the puzzle idea, combining it with plastic images of like pollution and plastic pollution, and also netting. So I have some very large nets that like fishing nets that I've ordered.
Wow.
And so I love I'm not 100% sure where it's going, but the fishing, the scale of the little sections of the fishing net are very close to the size of puzzle pieces. And so it's something I'm thinking about. So I don't know yet, but it's definitely, I'm thinking of using puzzle imagery and other imagery underneath. So, with the floral puzzle pieces, it was just, the imagery was only on the puzzle pieces. But what I'm working with now is having imagery underneath the puzzle pieces, and then sections of puzzles on top of that imagery with different imagery on it. So.
Wow, that sounds like
I don't know.
That sounds like a psychological condition.
I think it might be.
Thank you very much. That's interesting.
Great. Hopefully I'll have some new images to share soon.
Any other questions for Laurie?
I have a question.
Hey,
Hi, Laurie.
Hey, Chris.
I was wondering if, like, how many works you work on it. Do you work on things at the same time? Do you have a few different paintings going at once, or do you try to finish one before you jump to the next?
I usually try to have a couple things going in various states. Although the further along the painting gets, the more I just have to focus on that one. So I do try to work like in a series so that I'll have like maybe 2 or 3 paintings. My studio is rather small, but like I'll have 2 or 3 paintings going at the same time, but then one will kind of pull me in that really, requires all of my attention. But they're usually very related works, so then I can kind of hop back and forth between.
Thank you.
Thanks, Chris.
Any other questions? How about some students? We have some students here. Don't be too shy. So we have about another 15 minutes or so left. Let's see, there's somebody who just came in now. Oh, I have a just maybe personal question for you, Laurie.
Okay, sure.
I know you're a mother and of a couple of children. How many children do you have?
I have 2 children.
And you're being a professor and you're also a painter. And how do you juggle all these tasks?
It's a good question. You should ask my husband for the real answer. You know, I'm very fortunate that I have my studio at my house, because it allows me to, you know, kind of pop in and out. And so I think that, you know, it's, I don't know that there's ever really any balance, but it's just, you kind of deal with things as they come up. So, you know, teaching, it's very helpful that you know, the summers are a little bit less intense, so I get a lot of work done then, or like during semester breaks, you know, I can really focus on my painting. But I always try to, you know, I'm always thinking about my work, so I think that, you know, it is, you find moments here and there, even though things can get a little crazy. And I definitely found the past year, you know, it's the irony, every painter dreams of having a year of isolation, you know, working in their studio, but you know, it's been, you know, it's been really a challenge being home all the time and having my work here, my studio here, my kids, my, you know, it's a challenge, but at the same time, like, you know, I think everything feeds each other. So, you know, I think that on one hand, I'm very busy, but on the other hand, like, it's very rewarding to have all of these different aspects, you know, and they influence my work in different ways. So.
I wanted to ask you also a little bit about influences on your work.
Okay.
We had some discussions about that, but for those who have not known about it, could you share with us who are the biggest influences on you? If there are any other artists that have had impact on your practice?
Okay, sure. You know, I think that, you know, as I mentioned in my talk, I'm very much influenced by different areas of craft. I love, you know, like I said, embroidery, the history of tile making, and things that are kind of outside of the, you know, of what's considered fine art. But, you know, I think I'm very much influenced by that. I also love the pattern and decoration movement from the 1970s. You know, artists like Joyce Kozloff, I think have, you know, she's been a big influence in my thinking and my work. Robert Zekanich is another painter who I really enjoy. And so I think that, you know, while at this point, I'm not necessarily looking to specific people as influences, I think that those were, you know, that specific movement was very influential. And I think that, you know, just kind of looking at everything right now, it's just, you know, I can't really narrow down to one specific person or one specific movement, but I just think that there's so much, you know, that even just like, I've been looking at the way light is, contemporary light is different in painting right now than say like old mat, you know, so I feel like I'm just looking at everything now, and especially since we've been in quarantine, the opportunity, I can't wait to see art in person. But I feel like I'm just like absorbing all of these things that I haven't noticed before because I miss it so much.
Thank you, Laurie.
Sure.
Let's take just a couple of a few questions for Laurie. So we have some very nice comments on chat. Jenny Lin has a question for you. How did you find your art style, and when did you begin to like traditional works to incorporate into your art?
I think you find your art style by just making a lot of work. I think you just work and work and work, and then you start noticing tendencies that you have or sympathies towards certain things. And I think that's really what forms, I don't think anyone like just sits down and thinks like, oh, I'm going to work in this style. I think it's something that, comes as a result of a lot of hours in the studio. And, I leading up to all of this work is I've always loved painting still life, and I love the whole genre of still life painting. It's something that really excites me. And so I think that, I arrived at using pattern, for instance, by loving patterned objects or, painting patterned objects. So I think it's just, you start somewhere, you start noting all of the things that you love or that you are interested in your work, and that just continues to build. And then suddenly you're making paintings, and it seems like a very, it might be, for someone like, oh, how did you come up with this style or this idea? But it's just a kind of progression from where you started. And then the second part of her question, I love looking at I don't know, all artwork, but I love traditional works. That I love the history of like artist materials and the, of oil paint and that sort of thing. So that's something that I've always loved. And, I love looking at that, the whole history of it. And, so I think it was, I didn't really make it an intentional, like, I'm going to incorporate this now, but it's just kind of as a result of looking at, this work for many years.
So your primary subject has been, inspiration has been nature. Is there a particular reason or how you have been motivated by painting such a subject?
I think a lot of it stems from, I grew up in a very rural area in Pennsylvania. So I spent a lot of time outdoors when I was a kid. And, I would be exploring the woods or, looking under rocks and just enjoying time outside. And I think I had a lot of time to just imagine things. And so I think that was a big influence on, the nature symbolism that's in my work. And I also think that, then moving to New York City and being in a very urban environment, I think that there's a need or like a longing for that kind of environment. So, I create that through my painting. So, and also just seeing, like, I think another influence for the classic paintings was just the amount of litter that I would see just in my own neighborhood. So I think that, I'm always thinking about what's around me in the natural environment, and it just comes out in different ways. But I think it definitely stems from my childhood.
Any other questions for Laurie? Doesn't seem like we have more questions. Laurie, would you like to say a few things about the talk?
Okay, well, I hope that everyone enjoyed it. And if students have any questions, you can reach out to me through my website. My email is there, and I'm always happy to, answer questions, or, if I can be of help for a project or an idea that you're working on, please feel free to reach out.
All right, then why don't we end our public program? So thank you very much, Laurie, for
Thank
Thanks,
you,
Laurie.
Haywan.
presentation.
Thank you. Thanks, Fred.
All right, so let's
Thanks for
talk
everything.
to Laurie. And now this artist talk by Laurie Riccadonna in conjunction with the virtual exhibition Eternal Bloom at the Amelie A. Wallace Gallery at SUNY Old Westbury, as well as the actual exhibition at Hudson County Community College's Dean in Hull Gallery, which is still on view until the fall semester. We are going to end this public event. Thank you very much, all of you who have attended this talk. And thank you, Laurie, Shell,
Great.
Michael. And thanks to my co-hosts, Fred and Eric, today.
You guys.
Thanks so much for everyone for coming.
Absolutely. Okay. Have a good day, everybody.
Thanks. Thanks so much, Haywan.
Oh,
This was
don't
great.
worry.
Yeah. Okay. Okay.